Thanks so much. Thank you all for joining us to learn about our work exploring the impact of gameful learning on students with different backgrounds. This study investigated the impact of a novel design pattern, gameful pedagogy, on equitable outcomes in 6 instances of courses run at a large Midwestern R1 institution. You can probably guess which one. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about our team and the context that we do our work in. And then I'm going to establish a high-level framework of what gameful pedagogy is, all in service of sharing the analyses that we've done in this paper. I'm CaitlinHayward. I'm excited to share this work with you today on behalf of my collaborators, Kyle Schultz and Barry Fishman. I lead the research and development team at the University of Michigan Center for Academic Innovation, and Kyle is one of the outstanding data scientists on my team, while Barry is faculty in the Schools of Information and Education. The work that I'm describing today has received tremendous support from all 3 units and the University of Michigan broadly. That support in particular has come in the form of enabling us to build Gradecraft, a learning management system intentionally designed to support gameful pedagogy and instrumented to support learning analytics research. Barry and I started on this journey 10 years ago, co-founding Gradecraft and building out our understanding of gameful pedagogy in parallel with the platform. We're grateful to the Center for Academic Innovation and the Gradecraft team for helping us to build this particular plane while we are flying it. At the heart of our work of gameful learning sits the question of how games can inspire us to reimagine learning, school, and society. We see such deep, authentic, motivated engagement when people play games, and we question what it is about the design of school that does not encourage similar responses. When you consider the structural components of games in school, there's remarkable overlap. They both centralize learning, they both operate within a set of rules, and they typically both have accessible outcomes. Did you win or did you lose? Did you get an A or a D? Did you level up? A deep review of the literature has led us to believe that to shift the focus of students away from grades and over to learning, we need to centralize motivation theory alongside learning theory. We need to reimagine the role of both students and educators. And we need to, and in doing so, we'll create space to imagine fundamentally different outcomes. Today, we'll be focusing on analyzing whether all of that theoretically driven pedagogical transformation that we've brought about is resulting in actual changes to curricular outcomes, and doing so with an eye towards equity as it's reflected in basic demographic characteristics. Gameful pedagogy takes the stance that students learn best when they are empowered to take ownership over their learning. By centralizing motivation theory, we are not implying that learning theory is peripheral in any way to designing an effective learning experience. Rather, gameful pedagogy is designed to be employed alongside a range of different teaching approaches. And it's important to note that when I say gameful pedagogy, that doesn't mean that these courses are run as a game or even using games. Instead, they've been redesigned to employ structural components of games to create the scaffolds that are understood to best support intrinsic motivation observed in many game players. There is no singular answer to how games motivate. Through observation and experimentation, we can characterize what elements, be they game mechanics or curricular mechanics, are motivating for whom and under what circumstances. From self-determination theory, we ground our understanding that learners need to feel autonomous, competent, and that they belong in order to feel intrinsically motivated towards their own learning. Expectancy value theory helps us reflect on the perceptions that learners bring. We have to understand that students engage differently depending on how activities fit into their self-image, depending on the degree to which they find them interesting or useful, depending on the opportunity cost that comes of engaging. It turns out that our courses aren't the only thing that's happening in their lives, and the choices that they make about how to engage in learning fit within lives that are full of context. And from achievement goal theory, we can start to make sense of how learners' own goals and concerns relate to successful or maladaptive strategies of engagement. We've distilled 3 design principles that we have observed to be essential for the instructor to have at the heart of their gameful design. The first is agency. In games, players have agency to customize their appearance and their skill set and their role and the path that they'll pursue. In learning contexts, instructors need to centralize students themselves as valuable agents of their own learning, empowering them to make meaningful decisions about the work that they will do. The second is the space to fail. And as most of us have experienced, failure and recovery are key parts of the learning process. Video games have an advantage as a learning environment here because assessment is done by a computer with no time constraints and no feelings about what's polite. It can take you 1 try or 1,000 tries, and the computer can judge both as equally successful. Instructors can't offer unlimited tries, but that doesn't mean that we can't take genuine, meaningful steps in the design of our assessment system to help students see failure as a part of the learning process and to create space for recovery. And the third principle is systems thinking. Games are intricate and interactive systems. When you change something, you need to think about how other things should change in response. This is especially important when you open things up for students to make decisions. You will see expectancy value theory play out in how they engage. And so it's really important to have designed a system whereby whatever range of actions students choose to take, that you as an educator believe in the value of the learning that they've been able to demonstrate in your context. Building on these 3 principles, we've identified functional practices that typically relate to one of 2 distinct levels. Those that are at the course design level, like the practice of providing students with a clear set of expectations for how to succeed in the course, and those that work at the level of the assignment structures. I've mapped out these 8 examples, and while I won't attempt to go into detail here, I do want to touch on the importance of one in particular, and that's what we call rationing mastery. Which is also described as a grading curve. There are so many reasons to choose not to use a grading curve, but speaking specifically to student motivation, curves create a negative interdependence between student outcomes that inhibit cooperation and connection, and even reduce the quality of information transferred in grade outcomes recorded on record. When a curve transforms one student's grade into an A and another student's score that is 1 point away into a B, do you as an instructor really believe that those students came away with different bodies of knowledge? Maybe, but I encourage you to leave this session questioning that assumption and that curricular practice. So looking broadly across these 8 practices, I want you to think about them as being commonly implemented in the Gameful courses that I'm going to describe, and keeping in mind that the instructors teaching the courses will have chosen amongst these and through other mechanics, but that these will be commonly evidenced in the courses we'll be analyzing. One concern about this new pedagogical approach has been whether it equitably supports learners from different populations. In particular, a concern that I have heard since the very beginning is that given the foundational connection to games, are women less able, less supported, or less motivated in these learning contexts? Setting aside the frustrating and flawed assumption that women are disadvantaged in or by games broadly, and that research has broadly shown to be unfounded, we do believe that it is important to assess the impact of curricular innovations on student subpopulations in order to ensure equitable success. And we know that systemic inequities exist throughout education, making it even more important to assess if a change that we're making exacerbates those in any way. To name just a few of the existing inequities, in the US, white and Asian students graduate at higher rates than Black and Hispanic students. Disparities for underrepresented minority students are strongly visible in technical and engineering fields. Women have enrolled and complete bachelor's degrees at a higher rate than male students for decades, and yet earn only 36% of STEM degrees granted in the US. And so we were motivated to take this opportunity to investigate how different subpopulations of students have performed in Gameful courses when compared to their counterparts and taking into account academic performance. Laying out our research questions, we choose to compare men and women, minority and majority, first generation and continuing generation students. And here I'm going to note that these are obviously simplistic, and deserve to be unpacked with more analytical nuance and with an intentional approach to intersectionality. We have no shortage of work to do, I promise. We selected 6 different Gameful courses that had each been offered at least twice during the same semester. And by that, I mean sequential fall 2017 and fall 2018 would be grouped as a pairing. An initial exploration of the student population enrolled identified that there was actually significant variance in student academic background when you looked at the same course running in a fall versus a winter semester. And so we chose to separate the analyses for these. You can see on the right side here the 6 courses that we considered. We also chose courses based on their learner populations, selecting courses that had enough diversity within each of the 3 population characteristics that we could actually conduct statistically significant analyses. That isn't guaranteed. We work with many courses, and Michigan broadly still has much growth to do in terms of becoming a more diverse university broadly. The courses investigated span multiple domains and course levels, including an intermediate sociology course, an intermediate communications course, an upper level education elective, a second-year course in the honors program, and an intro course in movement science, where you see we've separated out into the fall and winter semesters for analysis purposes. We examined the following 3 outcome variables. When you give students autonomy around the coursework, and when you give them clear grade feedback and opportunities to recover, their achievement is not limited by a punitive grading curve, then one of the outcomes at the course level is a comparatively high number of students earning A's in the course. Given this, we used the binary outcome of simply whether or not a student earned an A or above. Second, we used course scores, which were normalized by dividing each student's final score by the minimum score required to earn the highest level of achievement in the course. Sometimes that's an A, and sometimes that's an A+, depending on the instructor's choices. Given the way that Gameful course designs often enable students to pick from multiple possible options, there are instances where students have done so much more work than necessary to earn the highest grade, that it actually creates a normalized score set for analysis that ranges from 0.14 to 1.74. Students who've done almost twice as much work necessary through their own choices in the course. And finally, as a student's grade point average in college has been shown to have strongly predictive power for a student's future grade outcomes, we calculate a student's GPA based on all of the grades that they've earned up to and including the semester studied, but then excluding their grade from the course being investigated. And we commonly call this the grade point average other, GPA-O. In conducting the analyses, we generated 2x2 contingency tables for each Gameful course instance, containing the breakdown of students who fell in and out of the demographic of interest, and then whether or not they went on to receive an A in the course. Using Fisher's exact test, p-values were generated to assess the validity of our null hypothesis, that students were equally likely to receive an A across both subpopulations within each demographic of interest. And then second, we used these plots, which I'm about to show you, that are called regression splines, in order to identify the specific impact of Gameful courses and other factors influencing students' performance in a course need to be controlled for. And so we used students' GPA-O as a measure for academic performance and used a functional regression with B-splines to model the differences in normalized score between students with similar GPA-Os who fell into the different demographic categories. We added simultaneous confidence bands to assess significance. There's one instance where we still didn't meet the thresholds to satisfy diversity requirements, and so we've excluded one analysis for first-generation students in honors because there simply weren't enough students in the subpopulation to complete the analysis. So here's the regression splines, and what I'm going to point out to look for, if you can see it, and I do understand that they're small, is if there's white space between the shaded portion and the zero line in the plot. And so this top right plot has an example of a place where we see signal. So looking across these plots, far from women underperforming in Gameful courses, all 6 courses had fewer men achieve A grades than the population proportion would suggest. Fisher's exact test identified 1, the education course, as being statistically significant. After controlling for academic performance, however, this difference disappeared. And when we produce the regression splines, there are 2 courses, that first one that I just identified, this honors course, and then the movement science winter course in the middle bottom, where we do see confidence bands that crossed the 0 line, denoting significant population differences. Men earning lower grades in honors as compared to women between the 2.3 and 3.3 GPA, and in movement science in the winter, men earning higher grades than women at this very low grade outcome, GPA level. Sorry. Nothing like losing your notes. Got them back. Can everybody still see? Awesome. Minority students were proportionally underrepresented among A earning students in all 6 courses. In 3, Fisher's exact test revealed these differences to be statistically significant. When we produced regression splines, 2 courses, movement science in the fall and honors, very briefly at the 2.9 GPA, showed minorities statistically more likely to earn lower grades as compared to their majority peers. And finally, for first-generation students, were proportionally underrepresented in the population, earning A grades in 4 of the 6 courses. But Fisher's exact test showed that only 2 of them, sociology and movement science in the fall semester, appear to be statistically significant. Again, after controlling for GPAO, this relationship disappears. However, in both honors and movement science in the winter, first-generation students actually earned more A grades than their population proportion would suggest, with one of these differences being significant. When regression splines were applied, one course, honors, did not contain the necessary minimum, and so we've excluded that, as I mentioned. Only one of the 5 courses showed population differences in the regression spline, which was movement science in the winter, with first-generation students performing better than continuing generation students at GPAOs above 3.7. And so the takeaways, looking broadly across all of this, and I really appreciate you bearing with me through those detailed summaries. Across the 6 course instances studied, we see places where students in the selected subpopulations appear to be performing less well than their peers, but in almost all of these instances, these differences disappear when we control for academic performance. So the challenge that we're left with is that gameful course design does not appear to be uniquely disadvantaging students by subpopulation, but neither have we successfully addressed the inequities present in higher education. In some gameful courses, we have observed students in subpopulations that have typically earned lower grades than their counterpart populations. In other courses, find pathways to success. The mechanisms for driving this need to be carefully inspected and considered for broader implementation and opportunities. These results are also not uniform across gameful courses, and so the curricular choices made within the different gameful courses needs to be analyzed very carefully for impact on different subpopulations. Gameful course design, as studied in this work, appears to be one method to consider creating opportunities for more equitable outcomes, but much work remains to be done to identify the specific mechanisms driving that potential. To help others bring Gameful to life in their own contexts, we've created 2 resources that are open to anyone. Gameful Pedagogy is a one-stop shop for our current understanding of how best to go about creating excellent gameful courses, and Gradecraft is a lightweight learning management system that we've built to support these learning environments. Finally, I'll note that Kyle and I are part of 2 other papers reflecting work that has been done at the University of Michigan Center for Academic Innovation, being presented at the conference. One presented by our colleague Gus Everard on grade inflation, and one that our colleague Becky Matz will be sharing on the efficacy of the eCoach platform. And I encourage you to check both of those sessions out. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Caitlin, for the fantastic talk. So we're just going to move now to questions, which are plentiful in Whova. And let's first start with the ones that have the most upvotes. So the first question is, what is the role of the teacher in the gameful pedagogy? Is he, she a peer like a more expert player? Is it the quest giver? Is it the puppet master that places student materials and quests within the module and learning activity design?
So there are as many answers to that as instructors that I've met. I think it is, you become the system designer, you're the game designer. And so some people take an active part in, some people do it as a traditional lecture, right? And the gameful components are all about the choices that students will make in how they're going to engage in the assessment. Other people will run it more as a co-experienced simulation with an overarching narrative that people are puzzling their way through. I think a core component is really that choice that students are given to be co-designers in a way. I've seen places where students are actually empowered to create their own assignments. And maybe those assignments are so high quality that instructors actually decide to make them available to other students. It's really changing the role of both players all players in the classroom.
Thanks. So the next question is, and this one I also very interested in, does game-based learning improve self-efficacy of learners?
So that depends on the game and what's being taught and the learner. And so at first I'll say that this is not my area of expertise. I don't actually study content taught through games, but I've read a fair amount of the literature, and as I think about it, it's a question of whether or not, I mean, in a game, if you don't get better at playing it, usually that's not a game that you're feeling particularly competent at. You're not super motivated to keep playing it, and you don't feel a strong sense of self-efficacy towards the game playing. So then the question becomes, is the content that's taught within the game such that you identify how to transfer it to other contexts? And that is very much dependent on how well the game reveals that opportunity for that content to be applied in other spaces. We've all seen places where you learn something in one space, and then you're asked to apply it over here, and you're like, I've never seen that before. And you absolutely have, but the context switch meant that it felt deeply foreign and you didn't feel like you could solve it. So I would argue that question is one of the core things that we want out of educational games, that they do support the teaching of self-efficacy. I think it's absolutely doable. I also think it's hard.
Okay, so for the next question, I would like, Andrew, do you want to ask a question live? I just see, I mean, maybe that might be easier than me reading your very long question.
Sure. Thanks, Vita. Yeah, and thanks, Caitlin, for the talk. I found it very interesting and different to what I expected, not knowing the area that you're in very well. What I'm interested in is the extent to which my sense from, I haven't read the paper yet, but I'm going to, and that'll give me more detail, I'm sure. But my sense of sort of game construction is there's sort of a curation of an environment that allows lots of different options, as opposed to maybe the sort of intelligent tutoring style thing where there's a predefined path that, you know, so what my question kind of gets to is, to what extent in what you're talking about with the gameful pedagogy, is it this sort of predefined path to some prize that has to be predicted by the teacher or the designer in advance, as opposed to sort of much more exploratory, multiple option openness, you know, don't really know what's going to happen prior to the sort of engagement? Because it seems that they could be quite contrary to each other.
Oh, interesting. I don't typically think of them as contrary. I think of them as different mechanics and potentially really helpful to each other. So at the outset, okay, I think of the choices that you commonly see, the pathways, right? Imagine like every RPG, are you going left or are you going right? Right? That has parallels to you're entering this intro to sociology course. maybe you've already taken an intro to sociology course in high school, and so you actually come to that context with a very different level of knowledge, and maybe that makes something much more appealing to you. And so giving people choices around the modality and the content topics that they'll engage. I tend to think of that as self-personalization, right? You're creating opportunities as the instructor about what's relevant to your course, and you get to set high rigor. This is something I'm constantly trying to convince instructors. You need to maintain high rigor in how you're going to evaluate these things. But you're giving them the opportunity, students the opportunity to choose which things they find most interesting. But then what I see sort of in Gameful instructors who've done this a number of times end up doing is building in expert level content that people can unlock, right? Because, and so that's one of the key features of Gradecraft, that we've built this way to say, okay, this thing is both important, it's worth a lot of points maybe in the system, it's really interesting and cool, but you have to have earned that badge and done this assignment and done that assignment at this threshold in order to engage with that, because typically I see people do that because it looks so cool and they actually do pretty poorly on it, right? And so it becomes this next level system that students are empowered to work their way through. So they really can inform each other.
Great, thanks. It's really helpful.